Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. I am Olivert James, and this is the Narrator's Program. The story that you are about to hear is a difficult story. Not everyone can handle this kind of story, especially if it is difficult. That is why this story will be written only for adults. At the same time, I don't want everyone to hear it. This means that people who have a weak heart are not afraid of this kind of story. It is a human story. So, people who can't handle this kind of story, please don't. This is a very difficult story, full of real events that I personally wrote. I don't want to say what I felt while writing this story, but I will leave it to your judgment in the end. At the same time, I am not sure how I will record this story today. So, God help me. Let's start the story. Good evening. It is not easy for me to talk about this story today. But today I am going to tell you a story, almost the beginning of the last point you talk about in your stories. It is the discovery of a disaster or its cause. I will start from this point, a point that you always stop at and say 2 words at the end so that the story ends. But I will start from this point. Without further ado, I will get into the events directly. The story began on my wedding day. My name is Omar. My wife's name is Basant. We got married out of love. The story of our love was talked about by many people. The first week of our marriage was not like any other. At least for me. What happened was that I felt that I married another woman other than Basant. This is a simple similarity. I felt that she was not the one. She was a completely different person than the one I loved. The problem was not only that I was trapped in a feeling. I felt that something tangible had changed. The features, the style of speech. Believe me, if I told you about walking, even walking had changed. Basant was not the girl I met at the beginning of our relationship. She was completely different. At first, I imagined that this was a natural change for marriage. Everyone says that when you get married, you will change. Whether you or your wife or anything else, you will change. Not everything we see before marriage is what we see after marriage. This is very beautiful and I agree with it. But after the first week, I realized that this is not the natural change of marriage. There is something strange. The person in front of you, when you take away from him the idea that he is a very good person, a very sensitive person, in a way, a hidden cat. I don't want to tell you how he was. Then you discover a very noticeable aggression. Aggression in the person you deal with daily after marriage. I don't want to say this, but even in the intimate relationship, there is aggression. It is not normal for it to happen in this way. It is not normal for him to hold my arm and look at me in this horrible way. There is aggression, there is a new kind of violence. It is a kind of absence of consciousness. Because I'm talking to her and she doesn't hear me. There is something unnatural. And this is not only in the intimate relationship. This is in general, in the general treatment. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that after all this change, at the end of the first week, we discover in our house, in our apartment, something that we never imagined we would see one day. In our kitchen, there are decorations on the wall. It is supposed to give a beautiful view in the kitchen. Anyway, I didn't like it, so I decided to change their place. We are sitting empty. While I was moving them, I noticed behind these decorations, there is something. If I didn't move these decorations, it won't be visible no matter what. As soon as I raised these 2 pieces, something will appear on the floor. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. What was it? It was a big piece of cloth and a piece of smoke. You know, a piece of cloth which is used to tie these boats, but a little higher. But it was still a piece of smoke. It was wrapped with 7 pieces of metal. 7 pieces of metal which are tied to this piece of cloth. Next to them, there is a piece of paper which is applied vertically. It is a very strange application. They fell on the floor in front of me, while I was standing for a minute. What is this? What fell? I was surprised. I didn't understand what it was. I grabbed them and opened the paper. I found words written in red ink. They were not words, but symbols. There were a lot of symbols, but in the middle of them, there was the name of Basant. Her name was clear in the middle. I looked at Basant. She didn't understand. She didn't translate like me. I didn't translate either. She looked at the paper and looked at me. What does this mean? I told her, I don't know. I said, I don't know. I know what this is, but I can't say it. I can't say this is a work. Of course, we understood that this is a work. But the shock itself made us not believe. What is this? How did it get here? I don't think that at a time like this, at the beginning of the marriage, a week after the marriage, you find something like this. Basant talked to her mother and sister. They came to our house immediately. I called my mother. She also came. They saw this work. I discovered that the metal that was on the thread is the material of bullets. This is the material that the weight of the arrow puts in the thread of the arrow to dive into the water. It is very similar. It is the same material. Anyway, when her mother, sister, and my mother came, Basant entered a very new state of nervous breakdown. I told her, me, my sister, my mother, and her mother. But since she saw the name on the paper, she is not good at all. Her mother started to think with me and tell me, how did these things get into your house? Basant's sister replied to her in a very new way. She said, no one entered your house after the wedding or what? And here I realized, no, after the wedding, what? On the day of the wedding, who entered the apartment? Basant's sister told me, say, who did not enter the apartment? All the people entered the apartment on the day of the arrow and the wedding. The apartment was open all day. Many people entered and celebrated and participated in the wedding. There were people we knew and people we did not know. I was there and I saw. Here I started to connect what happened, because everything was clear. I mean, there is someone in the shadow of the ladies working on the carpet of the apartment who did this in the kitchen. Who did this? Why did he do this? God knows. But God will take revenge on him. I went in and read about the deeds. And this was the first time in my life I did it. The first time I got involved in this world or searched for it in one way or another. It never happened. I read that if you discover that you have done a deed and found it, you are lucky enough to be able to remove this deed and be able to get rid of its harm. But unfortunately, there are people who do not find the deed they have done, and God will help them. But of course, what matters to me is the part of if I found the deed. I found it written that if you find the deed, all you have to do is go to a specialist who understands these deeds in this world. And this is so that each deed has a way to be removed. And sometimes there are deeds that are not easily removed. Here I knew that the disaster had happened. I accepted the matter. I got up and prayed 2 rak'ahs. I prayed and supplicated. I prayed a lot. I prayed to God to remove this harm and help me to bear it. But you said that there is someone in the family who is pious and knows God and can intervene in this matter, without having to resort to a stranger who is a Dajjal or a Nazab and fall into the trap that many people fall into. I went to someone who deals with the Quran. Let us stay away from this matter. I agreed, of course, and I told him to take these things and see what he can do. After I prayed and supplicated a little, I started to sit with her to ease the burden of the disaster we are in. But since her mother died and her sister passed away, she is in a completely different world. I entered her room. I found it empty and not focused. I talked to her and sat next to her. I cheated on her. She did not respond. I told her, God willing, everything will be fine. She cried and fell down. In the end, she decided to sleep. I saw that this was a good solution for her to rest. I slept next to her and I supplicated before I slept that God would remove her from him. The next day or the day before far, the next day I got up at night before far and I did not find her next to me. I looked in the room. She was not there. I was very worried about her. I was like a madman looking for her outside. I went out and found her sitting in the kitchen in the dark. I heard her voice, my beloved, crying with a very new freedom. I hugged her and patted her. I told her, God willing, everything will be solved. I am next to you. I am next to you until everything is solved and we will be fine again. I took this work to their relatives who say that he is a pious man and understands this. He said that he will try to get rid of it. As the days went by, things started to get worse for Basant. I noticed the neglect in herself and at home. The organized personality that I was impressed with became very chaotic. She became negligent in her own way, noticeably to anyone, even her family, when they come to visit us or even to me. And because I knew that this work will definitely affect her, I was ready to do anything she did to me. I swear to God, As they say, I made a mistake before. I was not going to do anything. I clean the house, do everything, but it will be fine. Until I found her who started to hurt herself. She started to hurt herself, and this is not easy at all. This started when her brother came to my house one day. My brother Basant was a colleague at work, and when I told him about this work, he was not convinced that Basant can get tired because of something like this, and that anything she will feel during this period is just an illusion that she creates for herself. She was definitely shocked, and this made her not balanced, and at the same time it will definitely affect her psychology, so he was not convinced about the subject of work, but he was convinced about her psychology, which will change because of it, or because of her knowing that there is a work to be done for her. Until she came to my house one day and I told her, come and see for yourself how your sister became. You don't believe my words or your mother's or your little sister's, so come and see. She came to my house so that when we enter we can see Basant in a very strange state. She was sitting in the entrance holding a dry pen, and she was working with it on her body, her arm like this and her neck, and she was not drawing with it, for example, no. She was working so hard that the areas in her arm were covered with blood. As soon as she saw me, she smiled, as if she was, I have never seen a smile like this in my life, a smile less than it is said to be very evil. She threw the pen to the side and gave it to her brother and went inside to make something to drink. After a while she came out, and I told her brother that the juice was very bad and she didn't like it at all, and then she came in and said that she was going to sleep. She came in and I told her that it was not easy, and she did not become herself, she became another person. I swear to God I was with her because she was not, and she was not herself, and she was herself, and she was herself, and she not herself, and she was 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 herself, and she herself, and she was 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 herself, and she herself, and she was herself, and she was, and she was herself, and she was herself, and she, for all the calmness that she was tired and not aware of anything she was doing. And at those times I couldn't control myself. I was collapsing like her, as if I was the one with the problem, not her. At the very simple times when Basanta was aware of it and good to some extent, she would spend all the time praying. And I, as much as I could, I swear to God, I was trying to comfort her. And I made an appointment with a really great and very well-known doctor. And we agreed to go, she and I, and she was honored. She was very normal on the road, and we were going. She was afraid, anxious, and nervous, but she didn't act strangely. We got to the doctor, we met, and we received a respectful welcome. He is an old man, and he looks very respectful. Anyway, we left her, and she came in, and I and Izzet went outside to the clinic. And Izzet and I were still standing outside, and we were still talking. I mean, it didn't take a quarter of an hour or maybe 10 minutes, I don't know. And we found the doctor's secretary calling us. The doctor needs us. So I looked at Izzet and I said to him, this fast? I mean, it didn't take long. Isn't this thing supposed to take long? Aren't these psychiatrists supposed to sit down and talk? He said, I don't know what's going on. We went in. I found Basant sitting on the chair, lying on the floor, in a very strange position, and very scared. And the doctor came out of the office where she was sitting, and told us exactly 3 words. Izzet, I'm sorry, I don't have a cure for her. That's exactly what he said. So I asked him, why are you saying that? He looked at me and said, why? What? I don't have a cure for the madam. I'm sorry, doctor, what does she have that you don't? I mean, does she have a prescription or what? Doctor, I want to understand. He said, unfortunately, I don't have an explanation for the madam's condition, and I can't explain this situation. I have to apologize. He left us and left. He was walking, and he was pressing my shoulder. I found him saying, may God help you, and he left. Izzet and I stood there looking at each other, and we didn't know what to say. Basant came out of the office, completely silent, with the same innocence on her face. I took her from her hands, and we left. I went home and Basant went to sleep. I sat with Izzet, and I told him there's no doctor or psychiatrist. The man can't sit with her. And he's a big doctor, not a small one. And you see, when we were walking, she pressed my shoulder and said, may God help you. It's very easy, Izzet. And I noticed in my mind that the one who did this job did it to Basant only, and he's proud of her. Izzet calmed down a bit, and then he said, look, I think this situation needs a sheikh, one of the well-known sheikhs who can cure them with the Quran, and not a quack or a spotter. And let me see who we can find, and may God make it easy. 2 days later, he called me and said, "There's a sheik, he's a bit far away, but he's well known and we won't go to him, we're going home. This man is known for doing good deeds, and he's a man of God." I told him, "Are you sure, is it?" He said, "Omar, you're talking to my sister, I won't hurt her." And I did talk to him, and is it, and I went to him, and Basant didn't come with us. I told him, "Are you sure Basant won't come?" He said, "Yes, he told me you and her husband only." I said, "Okay, let's go, and may God protect us." In those 2 days, Basant started to feel tired, and he started to see a dark spot on her body, and her face was dark, not black, but very dark. There's a dark spot on her face every now and then, and there's something else that happens before that, and that could be the cause of her tiredness. It's known that any wedding, when they get married, their parents leave food at home, so that they don't get tired during the first few days. Indeed, our parents left food for us, my mother and my mother-in-law, but we didn't care about what was happening, and since Basant didn't cook any food, the food we had started to go bad. We didn't take out the food, so the food went bad. Once or twice, I found Basant standing in front of the fridge, and she's eating from that food. I didn't give it to her the second time, when I realized that the food she was eating was poison, so of course she'd get tired of it. I threw the food away, but this was the second time I saw her eating from the fridge, and of course she had eaten from the poisonous food for a while. She got very tired, and her condition made me cry every time I prayed for her. I cried that she was suffering and unconscious. She wasn't aware of how much suffering she was going through. She felt it for sure, and that's what you see when you go back to her consciousness, and she cries and complains to me. But still, it's not easy, it's not simple. She called me and we went to this sheik. We did the work together. We met this sheik, someone who doesn't admit that he's a thug, but we also see what he does and we don't know. He did the work and he dealt with her with great caution, and he did a lot of tests on her before he took her from me. His house, by the way, was very normal, simple. There were no urns on the walls, no blood, no smoke, and this air wasn't present. It was a very normal house. He did the work, looked at the bullet holes and looked at the paper that was written, this long paper. And then he brought a big pot and melted some salt in it and melted the paper that was with the work, this long paper. I said, "Okay, I understand what he's doing and what his solution is, God willing." So we sat there, me and Izzat, silent, we didn't speak at all. He was reciting the recitations of the Quran and other things in the name of God. And to be honest, there was no strange speech or I felt that it could be magic or something. I didn't feel that. He looked at the paper that was wrapped around the bullet holes, and he said to us, "You'll leave it to me. May God help me solve it. Stay with it today and tomorrow." He meant Basant, and may God make things easier. We asked him, "Do you know who did this work?" We said, "No, we don't know." And we suspected that this was put in the apartment when the roof and the floor were being built. And the number of people was very large at the time, so we couldn't determine. And he said, as he said, "Stay with it today and tomorrow." We said, "Okay," and we left. I went home before sunset, and I did something simple, I prayed. I was very tired from the journey, so I went to rest, and I said, "Dear, go and change your clothes and rest, and come and stay with us at night, so that we can be next to her," as the man said. I didn't sleep for 2 hours together, because I woke up shocked by Basant's voice, screaming very loudly. I woke up, I found her hand on her chest, and she was very stiff. And God bless you, she was lying on the bed, on the floor of the bed. I picked her up and said, "What's wrong with you?" She screamed and put her hand on her chest. On the bed in front of me, a piece of cloth began to leak, a small piece of cloth in the middle of the stomach. There was no food, she didn't eat at all. Then I found out that this cloth was from the bed's shelf. I called her, "Come and follow me, your sister is tired. Let's take her to the hospital." Half an hour later, we took her to the hospital. They did a lot of tests on her until her blood was drained from the amount of needles and analysis. In the end, the doctor said that there was a lump in the stomach as a result of malnutrition and a large accumulation of stomach acids. We warned her not to drink coffee, meat, and things that stimulate these acids. and we told her that her case needed very new care for the next period, and he prescribed a lot of medicines. We left the hospital and went to get the treatment. While we were leaving, I found Ezzet's phone ringing. The sheikh was talking to him and telling him that we wanted to go to him. I asked him to postpone it, as we were going for a long journey. He said no, he was telling me that he needed to come. When I got home, I told my mother to come and stay with her mother and sister. Ezzet and I went down to the sheikh's house. We opened the door and sat down. He went in and took out the black bag that contained the work, the bag that we had brought him. He said to me, "Look son, by God, there is no God but He. I tried to solve it, but I couldn't. Our Lord, my son, said in Surah Al-Falaq, in the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate, and from the evil of the breaths in the contract, Allah Almighty has spoken the truth." There is a hadith about Abu Huraira that says, Abu Huraira said, "The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, said, whoever makes a contract and then breathes in it, he is a sorcerer, and whoever is a sorcerer, he is a polytheist, and whoever is related to something, he is entrusted to it." The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, was right. This means, my son, that whoever makes a contract and then breathes in it, as it is done in this work, he is a sorcerer. And this is a harmful sorcery. And this work is done by the death of your wife. And the substance of the bullet that this work is made of in sorcery is not an easy substance. And its danger is that it is not easy to break it. Death, my son, is in the hand of Allah alone. But your wife was bewitched before your joy. And this sorcery is done by a harmful person who did not think a second before doing this work. Because he does the work with bullets, he knows that it will not break easily. And he will overcome you if you find him. And praise be to Allah that Allah inspired you and you found him. But I am sorry that I could not break it. Don't break it. I tried. I could not. Above my head, my son. Above my head, I swear. I opened the bag and he was talking to me. I found the work as it is. Only the bullets were broken, not wrapped like the first one. It is obvious that it was broken and tied again. I did not know what to tell him. I did not have an answer to what he said. But it is an easy question that I asked him. What should I do? What can I do with my hands? I do not enter the prayer. I always remember Allah and read the Quran constantly. What should I do? What should I do here? I want to be good, but not more. I wish I could die here. What should I do? Please tell me what to do. There is no solution. There is no solution. There is no way, there is no solution. There is nothing to end the torture in me and that I also see. There is nothing. Oh Lord, oh Lord. I fell down while I was talking to him. A man was praying for me. He was praying a lot. Then I got up. I put my head on my head. We took each other and left. I went home. Bazanta was sleeping. I went to sleep next to her, patting her, and I read the Quran. May Allah ease her. I got up, I prayed, and I prayed a lot. A lot. I finished praying, and before I prayed, I heard her voice in the room. I greeted her, and I went to my neighbor. I found her sitting with her head down. She was saying to me, I have a terrible headache. My brain is bursting from the amount of headache. I went to my neighbor, I brought her some medicine from the pharmacy, and I found her bringing the curtain of the room to the floor. She was sitting on the floor, screaming, moaning, and in pain, and I couldn't do anything to her. I threw all her stomach medicine on the floor, and she was screaming. I gave her the medicine and she threw up. She completely stopped, and she was screaming. She was hitting me hard. I swear to God, the strength of one person in her case, or the strength of 6 people in general. She threw up very hard. I decided to leave her until she calmed down. But she didn't calm down. She was a little angry, and she was breaking things. And she was sitting next to me, and she was moaning. In her case, only God knows what I was feeling when I saw her like that. An hour passed, and I couldn't do anything to her. I talked to her mother. It was late at night. She got up, closed the door, and came to my neighbor. She sat with her, and I sat with her for a while, and I couldn't stand it. I left the house, I went to a big mosque next to us, I went in, and I sat there until dawn. I recited the Quran, and I prayed. I asked the Imam of the mosque to pray for me, and he was praying. I prayed until dawn, and I went home and I found them sitting. My mother was sitting next to her, and she was moaning. and I felt like I was in another world. She wasn't with us. She didn't look at me. She didn't even look at me when I came in. And my mother was looking at me, and she was moaning and I was crying. I swear to God, I couldn't stand it. A whole month passed and my mother was sitting with us in a similar way constantly. In her case, I don't want to say she was driving. There was nothing worse than that. I mean, when you start trying to pray so that God will remove her distress, and you don't know what to do, there's nothing worse than that. When every day any bite that enters her stomach, she empties it at night with a constant headache, and when I try to offer any kind of help, it's sometimes a meeting with a new organ, and I'm forced to do it, so I don't know how to help her. So there's nothing worse than that. I never thought that I would resort to one of those magicians, or those who say that they are treating people with the Quran, even though they don't know a single word of it. I never thought of that at all. I obeyed. I was tired, but I was satisfied. I was exhausted, and my energy was zero. But I still pray, and I remember God all the time. And I'm sure that God will make this distress a way out, and will have mercy on us with His mercy. Unfortunately, things developed after that, to the extent that sometimes Byzanta doesn't recognize me. She denies me and denies my existence, and that really hurts me a lot. But I know that all of this is due to her, and that she is not in control of anything that she does. And yet, I tried not to despair for a single day, or despair of God's mercy at all, but I was forced to weaken. Sometimes, I was forced to collapse like her, and imagine myself in her place. And I tell her, if one day, he finds himself hurting himself and those around him, without having anything in his hand to do, how will he feel when he wakes up and sees the result of his pain? It's not an easy thing at all. A week passed, and I was sure that it was a matter of weeks or almost months, and something would happen to Byzanta. What would happen? I lost hope. I lost the feeling that everything we have would be solved one day. So, God, I am content with your judgment. I will not object to what you wrote. I only ask for your mercy, God. I only ask for your mercy. Until a week later, at 3 p.m., I was reading the Quran in the prayer room, and Byzanta was in the room next to me, and out of nowhere, I received a phone call as if it was a call for salvation. What is this? Do you remember the sheikh I went to at first? I found him calling me and asking me if I remember him. I said, yes, of course I remember you. He told me that I called him and his phone was off, so I called you. Tell me, my son, the problem you have has been solved? I cried. I cried like I had never cried before. I told him, by God, sheikh, God did not decide that it would be solved yet, and we are living in torment. Praise be to God. God is the greatest. God is the greatest. How are you, sheikh? He told me, look, my son, my teacher and our great sheikh was traveling. He was on a tour to extract some works from some lands in other provinces, and he is still returning. I have not forgotten your problem since you came to me. I talked to him and told him everything. My son, if the work is still there, and I hope it is still there, I ask you, God willing, God might have the solution. He knows more than me. He is my teacher. So, my son, if you do not mind coming tomorrow, I will be waiting for you. I told him, I will be there. I will be there. I swear to God, I will come to you. When? I will come to you in the morning. He told me, in the time you want, my son, I will be waiting for you. I did not lie. I went into my room and took a nap. My wife was asleep. I woke her up and told her, God willing, the matter will be solved. I swear to God, God willing, the matter will be solved. There is someone who is talking to me, and God willing, he will solve the matter. He is someone that God will make in his hands. Wake up, please, God will stand by us. Please stay by my side. My wife went to sleep. I did not spend 2 or 3 hours staying awake with her jumping around like a madman. I took out the black bag with the work, and at 7 o'clock I was moving from home. My wife came and we moved. I went to the sheikh's house and knocked on his door. We entered and the sheikh had not arrived yet. He called me and he arrived half an hour later. He is a very old man and older than the sheikh we were with. He had a very nice. He came in and greeted us. I greeted him as if I was kissing him. I told him, God willing, the sheikh must have told you what happened and we are living in torture. Please, if you can solve this, you will not be late. I am under your in everything. He said, son, ask God, God willing, it will be good. Show me the work and take out the bag with the work. Look at it and look at the sheik next to him. Then tell me, stay with your wife and leave the work to God. Make sure, son, that God has written for us. Calm down, son, and throw your burden to God. I couldn't control myself. I left the sheik's house and went home. I sat next to Basant and decided not to leave her side. I was with her the whole day. After a while, she left and promised to talk to me. She didn't cry like every time. She started to tell me, I won you over. I won you over. I wasn't as light as I told you before the marriage. I'm sorry. Tell her not to be sorry. I'm next to you all my life and I'll do whatever you want. If I wasn't next to you at a time like this, who would be? I'm next to you and everything will be solved and everything will be fine. God willing. It hasn't been an hour and she was completely silent. She doesn't move. She doesn't hurt. She doesn't make a sound or breathe. I touched her. I moved her. She didn't move. Bazanta died more than a month ago. Until now, we don't know much about the cause of death. The sheik called me again the day she died. He told me that the cause of death was broken and I told him that she died. He told me that she suffered a lot. May God make her well and pray for her, my son. She didn't see much and God will have mercy on her. I'm done. I don't have anything else to say to her. May God take revenge on the cause even if it was him. May God take revenge on every moment we lived and every time we passed by he was the cause of it. May God take revenge on everything and may he make her in this life and the next. May God have mercy on her. The story is over. Good night. I don't have anything else to say. All I can say is that the story is inspired by real events. I wrote it over a day. May God witness that as long as I'm writing this story, I'm not comfortable at all. I cried more than once, and that's not because I'm writing, but because of the real story that happened, that I was inspired by this story. As much as I was told about it, it was very simple, except that he was the one who produced the story that you heard. So I just couldn't resist the urge to write it and record it. I hope you benefited from the story. It was clear. Don't let a stranger into your house. Not because of a cockroach or anything. Take care of your homes and yourselves, and may God have mercy on us. See you in the next episode, and good night.